The summer of 1942 marks the beginning of the film, which takes place during the height of the Second World War. At this time, Hitler's army had occupied the majority of Europe and a portion of North Africa. The preparations have begun for a major offensive that will take place through strategic areas including Stalingrad. German soldiers can be seen on the beach at Porto Corvo, Italy, taking advantage of the brief moment of tranquility and the pleasant weather in Italy. The soldiers were just getting into battle formation when all of a sudden they heard the band begin to play. Fritz, along with other members of his unit, transports an injured teammate who is confined to a wheelchair. Even though they arrived late, everyone was already in formation when they arrived. However, they made it just in time before the high-ranking officer handed out medals for their previous campaign in Africa, which they participated in. A call is made for Hans, who is a lieutenant, to come out and pin awards on his men. After that, everyone in the battalion is given the order to pack their belongings and get ready to leave. As they are leaving Italy, Fritz blows a kiss to his girlfriend while they are riding on the train. In contrast, the other stormtroopers take one last moment to take in the sights, despite the fact that they are well aware that their role requires them to be on the battlefront. They will soon travel through rural areas of Russia. Hans writes a letter to his girlfriend who is still at home. He is the new lieutenant of the company, and in order to get to know his men and earn their respect, he decides to stay with them in the cart rather than enjoying the comforts that come with his officer privileges. When they arrived in Stalingrad, they were confronted with the harsh reality of their situation. As the entire battalion marched towards their supposed mission, they came upon hundreds, if not thousands, of injured soldiers who had been evacuated from the front lines. Hans is a witness to the mistreatment of a POW, and he tries to report it to a German captain, but the captain laughs it off as nothing more than a joke. After that, the entire battalion comes together and sings a song together before listening to some words of encouragement from a chaplain. The beginning of the action occurs not long after that. A Russian industrial ruin is being bombarded by German artillery while the company takes cover in preparation for charging in. After the bombardment had ceased, the entire company moved into the building. After a short period of time, a fierce firefight breaks out after a German soldier accidentally fires his weapon, revealing where they are hiding. To make amends for his earlier error, the captain gives the soldier who unintentionally gave away their location orders to dash towards an enemy machine gun nest, toss a grenade, and then run back to the captain. He is successful in covering the distance and hurling the grenade, but he is killed in the process. Because of his sacrifices, everyone in the company was able to storm the factory. As a result of the darkness, a young German soldier with the nickname Gij is responsible for the death of his friend. Fritz and Rollo eventually came to his aid and tried to console the young man by explaining that situations like this are common in close-quarters combat, and that they too have been in similar situations in the past. A Russian soldier is seen by Gij just before he moves out, pleading for his mother one last time before passing away. After some time, the firefight came to an end, and both German and Russian soldiers' bodies were left strewn across the ground. Hitler emphasizes in a radio broadcast what an essential and pivotal location Stalingrad is for Germany's overall strategy, and German soldiers listen attentively. There are only a few pockets of resistance left in the city, but the troops on the ground are having a hard time pushing through the resistance. There are only a few pockets of resistance left in the city. They began with 400 men, but there are only 62 of them left at this time. In the dead of night, one of the German lookouts fires his gun, prompting the Russians to retaliate with their own gunfire. Fritz wants to know if any of the soldiers can communicate in Russian. A soldier declares that he is able to communicate in that language. Fritz gives the soldier the order to shout at the Russians, asking them if they want a temporary ceasefire so that they can get their wounded. If the German goes first, the Russians will agree to the terms. As there was no one willing to go out, the lieutenant took it upon himself to go with Fritz and complete the task. They demonstrated that they were not armed by going out with their hands over their heads. Their counterpart does the same thing, and in the lulls in the action, both parties begin to check on their injured allies. In the meantime, the soldiers on both sides are preparing their weapons in case there is a conflict. Despite the danger, the young Russian boy known as Kolja makes his way toward the injured soldier. Fritz, a foe, traded food rations with Hans, who was busy removing dog tags from the bodies of fallen allies. The ceasefire didn't last long because one of the German soldiers decided to fire a single shot, which prompted the Russians to retaliate with their own shots. A firefight breaks out, and the men who are already on the ground begin to scramble in an attempt to recover their wounded comrades. Hans and Fritz, along with Kolja, make it back to safety while everything around them is in disarray. The following day, a soldier brings some grub along with letters and news from back home. On the other side of the ruins, Russians can be heard playing music and humming along to the tune, which helps to calm their nerves. While this is going on, Rollo is keeping his distress to himself after hearing some terrible news from home. Fritz, recognizing that his friend is upset, walks up to him and inquires as to what the problem was. Rollo hears rumors that his wife is having an affair with a French prisoner of war while he is putting his life in danger on the front lines. The thing is, Rollo's wife wrote the letter herself because she didn't want it to appear to have been written by anyone else after they got caught, and she didn't want it to come from Rollo. There is no prior warning, and then everything goes to hell. The German soldiers quickly react by defending their position against the attackers. Hans, Jage, Fritz, and 2 other soldiers patrol the sewers beneath their position because they are concerned that the Russians may attempt to flank them there. In the meantime, Kolja makes his getaway by taking advantage of the chaos. Hans becomes separated from the rest of the group and runs into a Russian soldier named Irina, who is wearing her uniform and attempting to recover the body of a fallen comrade. He forces her to disarm herself before threatening to shoot her. Irina is able to speak German, and she makes an attempt to negotiate a temporary ceasefire with Hans. In exchange for allowing her to leave, a lieutenant accepts her offer that she will direct him to his companions. Hans takes the lead at a certain point in the sewage to check on a corner when they reach that point. Irina makes the most of the precarious situation by pushing him into the deep water and then fleeing the scene. Hans came dangerously close to drowning, but fortunately, Fritz was there to save him. They eventually regrouped with the other soldiers and assisted a friend named Edgar who had been injured by an IED. After some time, they arrived at the makeshift hospital that was full of injured German soldiers. The medics struggled to keep up with the number of injured soldiers, as there was no one to care for the injured they had brought in. Fritz demanded that a medic provide medical attention to Edgar under threat of being shot. Fritz threatens the medic with his gun and tells him to do something to ease the patient's pain. The medic protests that he is not a doctor, but Fritz orders him to ease the patient's suffering. Morphine is injected into Edgar by the medical professional. Then all of a sudden, a captain walks in and arrests them for pointing a gun at the medic and forcing her to do something she didn't want to do. Edgar does not survive in the end. During the winter of 1942, the entire 6th Army was completely encircled on all sides by a combined force consisting of soldiers from Russia, Romania, and other countries. In the meantime, Hans and Rollo, Fritz, and Jage are compelled to uncover and neutralize mines that have been planted by the adversaries. Due to the critical situation facing the army, they will be called back to the front lines to fight within a short amount of time. In return, Hans makes it clear that they are willing to fight in order to secure a pardon for their past transgressions. The commanding officer is of the same opinion. An advance troop is going to be ambushed and stopped in their tracks according to the plan. The organization has arrived at its predetermined location and has dug itself into its foxholes. The morale of the troop is low, but because there is no way for them to make amends, they are bracing themselves for the upcoming battle. After some time has passed, the adversary has expanded to include several tank platoons, foot soldiers have appeared, and a firefight has begun. When confronted by the tanks, the Germans responded by firing an anti-tank cannon and throwing a few anti-tank grenades. The enormous disparity in firepower and numbers between the two sides should have rendered the Germans defenseless. However, thanks to their inventive strategies and strategic positioning, the Germans were able to emerge victorious, albeit at the expense of a significant number of lives. In spite of the heavy winds and thick snow, the team manually moved the cannon to reassemble with the main army despite the fact that there were only a few soldiers left and no horses. As the army withdrew to a more advantageous position, the entire army laid waste to a village on the way there because there were no relief troops to cover for them. Soon after, the general hands Hans and the others the paperwork necessary to re-enlist them in the army. They were granted forgiveness for their misdeeds following the valiant struggle they fought against the hostile tank platoon. But before they can do anything else, their direct commanding officer orders Hans and the others to form a firing line and kill Russian civilians as a reminder of whose side they are on. This is to show the Russians who they are fighting for. Hans and the others pause for a while, knowing that this pointless massacre was wrong, and they try their best to maintain their moral composure during this time. They notice that the child Kolja is among those who are standing in line to be executed. Hans makes an attempt to persuade the captain to see reason in the hopes of preventing Kolja from being executed by firing squad. But the ruthless Nazi officer would have none of it, and he orders the men to shoot, threatening that if they don't, they will be the ones to take their place. Due to the limited number of options available, the unit places one in the chamber and waits to be given the command before pulling the trigger. In addition to that, another soldier takes a shot at them from relatively close range. A tragically early death befalls Kolja. When the group arrived back at camp, Fritz had finally reached his breaking point and made the decision to desert. It is in his plans to check out completely and then head to the airport. The earlier events have left Hans feeling disheartened, and he expresses this to his men by telling them that he is no longer proud to be a member of the German army. After suffering a traumatic experience, Hans agrees to go along with Fritz's plan to desert along with Gij. Rollo does his best to be reasonable and put a stop to them, but he can see where they're coming from. He's just trying to stop them from making another mistake that could get them into trouble. Otto, on the other hand, makes the decision to remain in the village. In a short time, Hans, Fritz, and Gij will show up at a civilian encampment in order to inquire about directions. In exchange for some bread, an elderly man provides them with the information, which the elderly gentleman distributes to the younger people standing behind him. They come across the frozen corpses of their allies as they travel. George happens upon a bloody tag that clearly bears the signature of a medical professional. Fritz is under the impression that this is their opportunity to escape from this godforsaken location. They search for injured tags for each one of them individually. After some time has passed, they arrive at the airport, where hundreds of injured German soldiers are lined up and waiting to be examined for their wounds. When a medical officer examines a wounded soldier, he notices powder burns on the soldier's stomach. These burns suggest that the soldier may have inflicted this wound on himself at close range. The medical officer gives the soldier the order to be executed for his role in the betrayal. Then it is Gige's turn, and a medical officer checks on the tag, but they are unable to locate the doctor's signature anywhere on it. The doctor prescribes medication and sends them on their way with well wishes after Fritz explains that Gij was unable to speak as a result of shell shock sustained during a tank battle. Hans, on the other hand, had no issues with the inspection because he was an officer. The soldiers are in a state of panic because the final plane is about to take off. In their haste to board the aircraft, there was some pushing and shoving among them, which eventually escalated into a minor disturbance. A significant number of the injured soldiers are unable to escape Stalingrad, and they are forced to march back to the main army. Hans, Fritz, and Gij have tracked down Otto and the rest of the gang. They observe that their captain has suffered severe injuries. Soon after, they hear the sound of an airplane flying nearby, and the soldiers go to investigate. They were extremely exhausted and hungry, so when the plane finally dropped off supplies, they scrambled to get whatever food they could get their hands on. After what seems like an eternity, the soldiers finally get a taste of something that they can eat, and they savor every bite of it. After some time has passed, the commanding officer arrives, points his gun at the soldiers, and orders them to stop moving forward. Talk about a killjoy. However, Hans and the others have had enough of the commanding officer's abusive behavior. The commanding officer is taken down by Hans, while Rollo opens fire on the villain. The commanding officer is able to get his finger on the trigger in time to kill Gij before he is taken down. The commanding officer, who is hoping against hope that they will be spared, tells them that he has stored supplies in a cellar up the road. However, that was not sufficient to convince them, and the commanding officer ended up being murdered by his own men. Despite this, the squad finds the plethora of supplies that the commanding officer was referring to. In addition to the meat, alcohol, and other items, they find Irina tied up on a bed. Irina is the same Russian woman who spoke Dutch to Hans when they met in the sewers, indicating that the commanding officer sexually assaulted her on multiple occasions. Irina was not allowed to join the resistance army again because she would be considered a deserter and a collaborator if she did so. Irina was immune to Hans' attempts to murder or rape her. Instead, he guarded her by directing his men to stay away from her and not touch her. In the meantime, the men are attempting to have fun and consume as much food as they can. Otto, however, takes the gun and shoots himself in the head, which was an unexpected turn of events. Rollo carries the captain upstairs so that he can join the front lines, but the captain passes away shortly after arriving. The general then disarms Rollo, which serves as a signal that they have surrendered. Irina ultimately succeeds in persuading Hans and Fritz to flee the country because none of them wish to spend their lives locked up in the Siberian Gulag. They travel for a significant distance through the treacherous snow. Irina survived until one evening, when a lookout shot and killed her before she could identify herself. Both Fritz and Hans are able to avoid being shot, but Hans succumbs to hypothermia first because of extreme fatigue and the extreme weather. Fritz survives the ordeal. Fritz refused to part ways with Hans and soon found himself following him into the afterlife. During the battle for Stalingrad, 1 million people lost their lives. In 1943, 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, but by the end of the war in 1956, only 6,000 of them were able to go back to their home country. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.